Greetings, fellow alchemists, and welcome to Wordplay Wizardry. Now, if you've been following along with these videos, you may have noticed a bit of a gap in their release. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, I was out of town and unable to record, but then when I got back, I found myself the lovely recipient of a sinus infection. And as you can imagine, that doesn't exactly make recording fun. And it doesn't make for the best audio. So I thought I'd get myself well and then come back and talk to you. Though what it does do is remind me that it might be time to start my second series of videos on health. Of course, if you're watching these sometime in the future, then that little gap means absolutely nothing to you. And greetings from the past. Now, last time, we focused on the basics of creating a main character and the majority of the side characters. If you missed it, click on the link in the description. In this video, we're going to go in the opposite direction, from good guys to bad guys. One of the things that we'll discuss in this trilogy of videos is the fact that for every positive, there's a negative. Just as the main character is the protagonist, their primary adversary is the antagonist. The antagonist, according to Merriam-Webster, is an agent of physical antagonism. Antagonism, or antagonize, means to act in opposition of or to provoke hostility. If you recall, protagonist goes all the way back to the ancient Greek games and means primary competitor. Antagonist has a similar story. Antagonize comes from agony, which itself comes from the Greek word agian. It means a contest or struggle, as well as anguish, and refers to the opposing competitor in the games. Protagonist was the hero competitor, and the antagonist was their competition. Something I found really interesting. A lot of these words have become so commonplace that we oftentimes forget their origins. So it's nice to remember from time to time. And one of the best ways to craft an antagonist is to create the exact opposite from your protagonist. One of the best known pairings is Batman and the Joker, where Batman is order, the Joker is chaos. Let's go back to our examples. First, Star Runner. And I want to start here because the antagonist in the first novel is a bit of a gray area. Some could argue that it's the other side of the war, the Confederation. Others might argue that it's the war itself, the galactic strife. But I'll throw another good possibility into the mix. And that is the character Ursay. When we first meet him, Ursay is helpful and somewhat accommodating. By the end of the novel, he's given into his rage entirely, his hate for the opposition. He wants to fight the war in the exact opposite way from Simon. No compassion, no negotiation, just us or them. He wants victory. Simon wants peace. He wants to find a way to end the war without obliterating the other side. He is compassionate, whereas Ursay is strict or absolute. But Star Runner is interesting for its antagonists. Not only are there several, but they also appear and disappear over the course of the series, meaning we feel their actions without even seeing them. The other protagonist example was Jasper Vaughn of Antiquity. His antagonist is much more cut and dry. Reinhard Rousseau. Jasper wants to preserve and protect. Reinhard wants to plunder and profit. Same field, opposite mentality. But there is one major point to remember. A villain is a hero, or could be. The only difference is bad decision making. Think of every great villain, any villain. In every instance, they could easily be on the side we consider good. To some people, they probably are good. But for each one decision, or perhaps a couple, is all it takes. One bad choice to tip the scales. Maybe they make it. Maybe someone else does. But they still feel its effects. All that matters is that bad choice. And what could be never will be. That possible hero goes down a dark road, and the only address is villain. What's interesting is what happens after that bad choice. It spawns another and another. Soon, all the choices are bad. But that also leads to an interesting aspect. A villain's relatability. Remember me asking you to think of a villain? How many out there do we agree with? How many villains make a good point? They just choose a bad method. Sometimes it's a good idea, but a bad execution. And the best part is, that mentality or methodology for creating a villain works for all types of villains. Let's say your story calls for a brute type villain, a thug. The bad choice there is violence. Solves all problems. Not any other method. What about an intellectual? Someone who's always 2 steps ahead. Don't know the type? Hans Gruber from Die Hard comes to mind. The intellectual's bad choice. Crime pays better. Using that powerful brain to break the law. Or perhaps a soldier. Well, that bad choice may be that there's only one way to fight a war. Something else to remember. Villains need to be complex. They should be just as interesting and just as layered as your good guy. Oftentimes, they have a relatable cause with the right speech. You may just find yourself agreeing. And they're not always inherently evil. For a lot of bad guys, the moniker of evil is merely a case of circumstance. We see them as evil because more often than not, we're in opposition to their goals. Now, Mr. Goodnight from Oddity Academy, he's evil. Goodnight goes from one persecution to another, makes a deal with a being called a devourer, and is willing to sacrifice children to achieve his goal. But here's the thing. Goodnight made a bad choice, just like everyone else. He chose hate over love. At the beginning of his story, he wanted to persecute witches, and that led to his bargain with the last devourer. Another poor choice. Yet, his story does have layers. There's more to him than just bad or evil. Probably not enough to make him sympathetic, but at least enough to make him understandable. Goodnight isn't exactly an exception, but he is an extreme. He uses monsters and literal nightmares to accomplish his goal. That, to me, is extreme. Now, another thing we should probably discuss is the anti-hero. Anti-hero literally means opposite hero. Where a hero makes good choices, an anti-hero makes bad or darker choices. The reason that I bring up anti-hero in this episode is because of the similarities between an anti-hero and a villain. In any other story, the anti-hero would probably be the villain, because they'll often employ villainous methods to achieve their goal. But in the anti-hero's story, there's always someone darker. An anti-hero might use violence but always has some form of redeemable quality, likely who they are using violence against. Take the Punisher. Frank Castle is willing to kill, whereas most comic book heroes are not. Killing is a tool of villains. So why is Frank willing to use it? Because violence is the only thing the criminals understand. Punisher is the embodiment of fighting fire with fire. Simply put, an anti-hero is a hero who uses the villain's methods against them. They also have twisted versions of, or simply lack, the characteristics of a hero. Those qualities are things like morals and ideals. I do have an example from my own work, but since I haven't released that story, I don't want to share just yet. So if you like anti-hero stories, be on the lookout. Now before I wrap up this video, I want to talk about a special villain. This villain has appeared in a number of stories and is perhaps the most dangerous of all. This is a villain that no hero or main character can escape. It is always around the corner. And that villain is time. Time wants nothing, desires nothing. All it does is march forward. What makes time so fearful is that it always marches, either forward or backward. Time is always moving. There will always be less of it, no matter what. Yet, unlike other villains, time is not evil. Death is not evil. They're not malicious. They simply are. And in some ways, that's what makes time the ultimate villain. Because in the end, time always wins. Time is the most powerful thing in the universe, second only to gravity. For a lot of fiction, time and death can be seen or even used interchangeably. Because of that, both of them share similar qualities. Death wants for nothing, desires nothing. Death is not concerned with who you are, what you've done. Death is not spiteful or vengeful. Death simply is, just like time. When it is our moment to go, we go. Death doesn't ask questions. Everyone, everywhere is equal in its eyes, just as everyone, everywhere is equal in time's eyes. By that, I hope you can see how similar they are and how dangerous and fearful they can be when used as a story's villain. Just something to consider in case your story needs a more ethereal bad guy. However, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, if you'd like to see me expand on something we discussed in this video, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you're enjoying yourself, leave a comment. Until next time, fellow alchemists, take care.